Hello, and welcome to Transforming Grief, One Conversation at a Time, a podcast dedicated to not only destigmatizing conversations around death and grief, but also exploring them as transformative threads that weave honesty and curiosity into the fabric of our shared human experiences. I'm your host, Dr. Jessica Thomas, and today I'm honored to be speaking with Laura Musselman, Director of Development and Communications with the Humane Prison Hospice Project. Their organizational mission is to revolutionize end-of-life care in prisons by training incarcerated individuals as peer caregivers who provide compassionate, community-based support within multidisciplinary teams. Their work fosters a culture of compassion, changing how the most vulnerable are cared for at end of life. Well, welcome, Laura. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
first
excited.
off, yes, me too. I always like to start with what drew you to this work, what inspired you to work with this organization.
Sure. There are a few different threads that lead to where we are now.
Yeah.
Really, my background in death care and work in the end of life space began with the deaths of my parents. I am an only child. I was in when both of my parents got sick and died. And like a lot of people, I come from a family where we didn't talk a lot about death and dying and what that would look like and what, all the very logistical responsibilities behind that look like. So I had to do a lot of scrambling to figure it out. And that was lonely in and of itself.
Yeah.
Plus you mash in the isolation that comes with grief. And that was sort of the moment I decided, I'm learning all of this. I think that would be useful for people I know. At the same time, I was teaching ethics. I was a philosophy teacher at a college locally. And so we were talking about issues of end-of-life care and what does it mean to lend compassion in authentic ways. I wound up showing my students one day a video of one of the original co-founders at Humane speaking, doing a TED Talk. And I remember standing there kind of in the midst of my own grief thinking, this is putting ethics and values into action, and I want to do that. So
Wow.
yeah, I began working in hospice care. I trained as an end-of-life doula. And one day, lo and behold, Humane was hiring. And I immediately knew that I needed to apply. Here I am.
Oh, I love that. I love how all those threads came together and that the paths crossed. Yeah.
I always joke with people that, I'm not using my philosophy degree directly, but it still comes in handy. I feel like I do still get to use it sometimes. So that's,
Absolutely. How would you describe what hospice means in this context in prisons?
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit and just say that, the first day that I went into a prison to work with peer caregivers was pretty stunning for me. I really had no idea what to expect. But the thing that always sticks with me is the feeling of leaving, of walking back out through the gates and into the parking lot and into my car, knowing that everybody I'd just spent, a handful of hours with wasn't able to do that. And I felt drawn to continuing to show up. And I think part of that was just maybe a little bit, this is where I need to be. And part of it was, I don't come from a family where I had family members who were incarcerated. I think like a lot of people who come across our work had never really thought about what death and dying and end-of-life care look like in a prison. And so spending that few hours there and getting to know all these incredible caregivers who I still see and who I love dearly gave me a really sort of comprehensive understanding of just the need to reclaim dignity and humanity, especially in a place that is often defined by punishment and isolation. I realized very quickly that what they were doing was standing up and demanding the care that they know that they deserve and finding ways of giving that to each other, almost with or without permission. It's an act of resistance almost against so many pieces of our prison system that are designed to be dehumanizing.
Yeah.
It's an act of reclamation. And the people who are doing this work in these spaces are not just caregivers. They're changing the culture of that environment one action at a time. They're really modeling what humanity looks like in a system that does not want to recognize it often.
Wow. What a transformative opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, for everyone involved.
Truly for everyone involved. I mean,
Mhm.
at the core of it, obviously, this is about patient care. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so meaningful for them to be able to have somebody who they share an experience with, a really unique experience of being incarcerated, somebody maybe they've known for decades or they've seen around, who the level of trust that that person has my best interests at heart is so much different than hearing about care or next steps or what ought to be done by a staff member, where
Mhm.
there's already this built-in divide of us versus them.
Yes.
So for the patients, of course, that matters deeply. It really bridges that gap of mistrust.
Yes.
It really brings in socialization, that feeling of, somebody cares about me and I'm not alone. I don't have to die alone in this place.
Yeah.
But for the caregivers too, I mean, I can't tell you how many times we hear back in like an evaluation that doing this work, and I'm going to quote directly, has made them feel human again. Just
Wow.
that sentence that being trusted to show up in this way, to exchange vulnerability and humanity in this way, to be trusted to do that and feel like I contribute to my community, I have a
Yes.
purpose, I have a reason to get up and show up every day is extremely meaningful. It's a huge benefit to the staff. I mean, the
Mm.
correctional healthcare staff who we work with are wonderful, and they so appreciate having more eyes and ears to really help share that load of patient care because often they're understaffed and under-resourced. And then
Yeah.
certainly for all of our volunteers who go in, a lot of whom have never, prior to working with us, set foot in a prison, it completely
Right.
changes their perspective of who is incarcerated and what are they like, which is, I think, so essential to the conversation of mass incarceration in this country. I think there are a
Mhm.
lot of people who have a lot of very passionate opinions about it who
Uh-huh.
actually have never heard the stories,
Yeah.
who have never gotten to know people who are incarcerated as people. And that drives a huge wedge between
Yeah.
communities and people residing in our state prisons.
Right. Wow. There's so many layers there in what you just
Yeah.
said. I mean, reclaiming dignity and humanity.
Yeah.
And I think like death and death care cuts straight to the core to our
Hmm.
humanity and the
It really
vulnerability
does.
that's involved there.
Yeah. I mean, even working outside of prisons as an end of life
Mhm.
doula, working in community hospice, I mean, there's no inauthenticity
Right.
in death and dying, right? I mean, you are going to be very authentically who you are,
Yeah,
and you are going to have your authentic, and that's scary
it
for
is.
people. I mean, the loss of autonomy, the loss of control, and you put that in an environment where autonomy is
Right.
already, extremely threatened. You don't have your freedom. You don't get to have the comforts of home. You don't get to necessarily be
Mhm.
with your family in most places. So having programs like this and empowering people to be caregivers in this way,
Yeah.
to show up for their chosen family, their friends, sometimes people they've known for decades, is so important.
Yeah.
It's really key to restoring so much of that dignity and humanity in those spaces because it's been stripped away.
Yeah, I think repositioning oneself as a, condition of care for someone
Yeah,
else, just extraordinarily powerful.
right. And, for anybody who works in, any end of life care space,
Yeah,
I mean, you know that it changes you
yeah,
to be there with somebody in their last moments. And
yeah,
the one thing I always tell people when we're talking about, sort of what does this work look like is particularly if I'm talking to people who have experience in hospice end of life care, there's this kind of idea that people feel called to it. You do it and it's like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. You kind of either get it or you don't.
mhm,
And that's true for people who are incarcerated as well. I
mhm,
mean, I can't tell you how many times we've started a training and a participant will kind of say, I can't do this. I
sure,
cannot be with
sure,
somebody while they die. That's intense. And
mhm,
then that person winds up kind of being the de facto leader of the caregiving group because, as
really?
it turns out, they're incredibly good at it. But it's nothing that they could have known before. Nobody gave them
Sure,
that opportunity to provide care in that way. And so it's really empowering to know, like, I am more than what I've been told that I am. Like, I do have things to offer that are positive, that
yes,
are beneficial, that help people.
yes,
But there wasn't necessarily an opportunity or an outlet for me to do that before.
right,
It's
right.
amazing the things we all kind of discover about ourselves in that space of caregiving.
Absolutely. Well, with the training, so can you give me a little bit of snapshot of like what does it look like? What does this
Yeah.
look like? Like how does it happen? What is the training like? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how it happens varies kind of widely. So I might I
Okay.
might circle back to that, but the training typically is an 80-hour training. So it's 2 intensive weeks, Monday through Friday, usually 9 to 5. Again, that depends on where we are training, what their needs are, what space they have available for us. But the curriculum is a 15 module curriculum that covers really practical skills like the paperwork of healthcare, disease trajectories, bloodborne pathogens, how to use bedside medical equipment. But it
Mm,
also, I would say half of it probably is more human centered
hmm.
modules like active listening and communication, trauma informed care,
Wow.
cultural competency and humility, spirituality, grief, sitting vigil, things like that. So it's extremely comprehensive. Um, and the goal is to really prepare everyone who we're working with to not only help with patients who are on a hospice trajectory, but also palliative care, geriatric care, and
Mm,
memory care, which is a big issue in prisons as well. So they also learn about how to care for patients who have dementia, Alzheimer's, but also just the issues and the hardships that
mhm.
come with aging. Because
Yeah.
particularly in prison, studies show that folks who are incarcerated typically age about 2 years faster
Mhm.
physiologically than people who are not incarcerated.
Mm,
Whereas outside of prison, we tend to think of, older adults as being 65 or older. In
mhm.
prison, that age drops to about 55, sometimes 50, depending.
Wow. Wow. That is an impressive training.
Yeah, we're really proud of it.
You should be. I want to take it. It sounds wonderful. I mean, it
It's
sounds,
great. We have a lot of
yeah.
participants who will tell us that they'll share bits and pieces of the training, like a breathing exercise or a
Mhm.
kind of discussion activity with, you know, other people in their housing unit who would find it useful. We've had correctional officers sit in on our trainings because they're there to kind of escort us around
Yeah.
the prison, who come away from it just like, oh my God, that was actually so helpful for me because I work in a housing unit that has a lot of older adults. So, yeah, it's very comprehensive.
It seems like a training like this, of course, it's transformative in that it is helping, the caregivers, like, intrinsically, and also the person who is declining or dying. But also, it sounds like it contributes to a different culture.
Mhm.
Because like
It
you're saying,
does.
like somebody might sit in the training and then they're talking about it. So even if you're not involved intimately, you are you're hearing about it, you're getting like a peripheral kind of
Yeah.
experience from it.
Yeah, and that kind of change, that culture change, as we call it, is slow. I
Yeah.
mean, it's difficult to really see it
Yeah.
in real time, but we do get to hear these really incredible stories from
Mm.
caregivers who we work with saying that, the correctional officers at the medical unit are treating them differently, are maybe offering handshakes or calling them by their first name instead of their last name. Because when you see exchanges of humanity, it's really,
Yes.
really hard, I think, to watch that happen and then continue to treat people like,
Yeah.
you're a person who's in prison and I've been trained to treat you in this particular way. You
Yeah.
see that humanity, that vulnerability that
Mhm.
is not often, I think, in the broader public perception,
Yeah.
typically identified with people who are incarcerated. And so that affects everybody
Wow.
in that space.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that part of it. My wheels are just turning because I think
Yeah.
it's just so powerful, you know? We haven't
Yeah,
even been
it's,
talking that long and I'm
I know.
already moved.
Yeah, and it's, part of the training too is, we don't want to go in and do this really intense training and then say, okay, goodbye, good luck, like, have a great
Right.
time. We have at any given site a couple of our volunteer facilitators or sometimes our staff who go in on a monthly basis to
Yeah.
check in, provide any sort of curriculum refreshers.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we'd love a refresher on, communicating with Alzheimer's patients. We can do that. But it's also a space to offer grief support because
Yeah.
caregiving's an extremely difficult job. And
Yeah.
unlike outside of prison where we can kind of go home at the end of a long day in hospice or something and be with our families and cook a good meal and kick our shoes off, they don't get to leave.
Yes.
It's always happening. And there are deaths in housing, and there are people who you live with who have maybe lost somebody outside who are grieving. And so for the caregivers, it is a really physical expression of care. I mean, they are sitting at the bedside, they are assisting with activities of daily living, but they're also often the people who will inform other people in
Mhm.
the general population about a death,
Mm.
who offer grief support to their friends who have maybe lost somebody that they couldn't be with outside.
Mhm.
It's,
Yeah.
it's an all-time job. It doesn't really stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that. Well, let's see. Are there rituals or moments that kind of stay with you? So you're in the development, the communication side of it, but you've also been in like,
Oh yeah.
boots on the ground,
Yeah.
So are there just like, I don't know, anecdotal moments or yeah, that you might be comfortable sharing?
Yeah, there's a lot. Have the privilege of I do go in and provide monthly support at one of the women's prisons here in California. And I've actually been working with that group of peer caregivers since before I even started with Humane. They were my introduction to doing this work. And that group's really, really special to me. I would say, I mean, rituals can happen in big and small ways, right?
Yes.
And sometimes a ritual is just coming together and debriefing something that happened, which we do on a monthly basis. It can be as small as that. But there have also been these really big moments
Mhm.
that are especially meaningful. There was a memorial service once. It's actually, the entire story is incredible. There was a patient who had been living in that skilled nursing facility there at the prison for probably 8 or 9 months being cared for by that team of caregivers. And she applied for compassionate release, which here in California, if you have an end of life trajectory of a year or less, you can qualify. And she was able to get out on compassionate release. We were able to secure her a bed at an inpatient hospice home where I was working at the time. So she was able to die there comfortably with her kids and her grandkids near her. And then a few months later, we had a memorial service at the prison for her in the chapel. And I still have these incredible lilies that the caregivers made out of paper. They made programs and they invited her daughter to come. And she came. And it was so, I mean, spectacular is kind of the only word for it because so many things had to fall in place for this to happen that it's so rare.
Right.
But she came and, it began as this structured sort of
Mhm.
memorial service with singing and speeches. And by the end of it, we were all sitting in the pews. And this woman, all of her friends there at the prison were telling her daughter about, funny stories, inside jokes, what they'd gotten to know about her over the past several years. And her daughter got to share stories with them about growing up with her mom. And it was just this really makes me emotional to talk about it. Incredible moment. And the daughter was so grateful because even though she couldn't be physically with her mom for that whole journey,
Right.
she knew that all of these women were there caring for her and that
Wow.
her mom was being cared for the way that she would want her mom to be cared for. And I think that's another really important aspect of this work is that, we come across people sometimes who have the opinion that if somebody's in prison for X, Y, or Z reason, they should die there. They should die alone. And I think what people fail to take into account is that that's somebody's mom, that's somebody's
Yeah.
dad. And the
Yes.
fact that this woman got to say, A, her mom didn't die in prison, but that B, her mom was not alone,
Yes.
that's impactful for her. That's impactful for her children. That has a ripple
Yeah.
effect intergenerationally through their entire family.
Yeah.
And the gratitude that I think the caregivers got to feel directly from her is something that I wish they were able to have more often, to have
Yeah.
somebody really look at them and say, I know what you did. I know the work that you did for this person I love, and it matters. And thank you.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, truly being seen and destigmatizing
Yeah.
these losses and also like you said, the trajectory, the grief trajectory of her daughter was
Yeah.
totally transformed.
Yeah. There's a huge difference between, somebody having to experience the death of, in this case, their parent in prison, thinking, oh my God, they're alone. They're not being cared for compassionately. And knowing that, no, this person, my mother, was cared for
Yeah.
by all of these incredible women in this way. And I can know that. And that helps me with my grief.
Absolutely. Like hearing the stories, like you said, giving voice and vision and understanding of her mother's connections.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of lent her daughter this maybe filled in the blanks of what,
Yeah.
she couldn't see or know or understand.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, that in and of itself being so transformative.
Yeah. I hope that it filled in some of the gaps as far as like time lost
Yes.
to her
Yes.
mother's incarceration.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
you can't get that time back. But we were all able to have this moment of community and coming together to really remember her mom
Yeah.
and talk about who she was as a person, not the reason she was there, not, just her death, but like who she was and the way that she made people laugh and, the generous things that she did for others and her mischievous personality, like things, it was so whole.
Yes, well, a sense of wholeness there. Well, I'm
Yeah.
reminded of when I worked with children and teens in the foster care system whose some parents were incarcerated and some whose did die while they were
Yeah.
incarcerated. And I just think of how transformative an experience like that would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
how
Because
it
it,
will.
it does
Mhm,
affect.
it does.
If you've grown up in a family and generationally there's a threat of incarceration, I mean, we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of like the politics around mass incarceration in this country, but I think if anybody knows even a little bit about it, I am so sorry my dogs are
That's okay.
on one. That does have a real effect.
It
And,
does.
it's not an effect we'll necessarily see immediately or large scale, but we know that the effect is there and that it matters and that
Mhm.
it matters that people are allowed to grieve their loved ones and hopefully be able to break some of those cycles.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and the opportunity to destigmatize those losses,
Yeah.
that's just a huge that's completely huge. Yeah. Well, how does, like, how do people take care of themselves? Like, I mean, you're in this work, you know, your colleagues in this work. How do you all take care of yourselves and find restoration?
For us,
Huh?
like our team, you know, it's hard. It's hard. And it's something that we talk about a lot because when we go in and we do these trainings and we're providing support, we do talk a lot about the importance of caring for oneself and trying to carve out and in prison, of course, it's really difficult to find privacy, space, solitude for processing that. So we talk a lot about that. And then there's always a moment where we kind of look at each other and realize, oh, maybe we need to do a little bit more of that. You know, I can't speak for everyone. For me, I think a big thing has been really enforcing some boundaries
Yeah.
around work, you know, not checking email after a certain hour,
Right.
even down to not reading certain things in the news or watching certain
Hmm.
television shows or documentaries because it will suck me into
Yeah.
workspace, like
Yeah.
activism. I'll start like writing notes,
Huh.
coming up with messaging, coming up with, you know, grant
Yes.
proposal ideas. And
Yes.
it's important for me to have time when I'm not doing that. I have, you know, work related books that I will only
Yeah.
read during quote unquote work hours.
Right.
And evening is for whatever other book I might be reading that's unrelated because I'm
Yeah.
also a mom. And,
Yes.
you know, when I'm not out on site at a prison, I'm working from home.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
it can be really hard to differentiate between work and home when you
Yeah.
work remotely, as much as
Yeah.
I do. So making
Yeah.
those boundaries really clear and trying to honor them as best I can has been
Yeah.
extremely important so that I
Yeah.
can devote myself to the other people in my life who I love and who need me and, you know, I
Yeah.
care for. But so also I can maybe get a little bit of that back as well because definitely
Hmm.
it can be a hard place to work in.
Yes.
It's heavy and there's usually something I read every day that I have to kind of get up from my desk and have like a rage moment.
Huh?
So,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. So
Well, good.
boundaries are important.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, so in terms of like a systemic question, like what barriers do you see standing in the way of providing more humane end of life care in this setting? And what gives you hope
Yeah.
for change?
That's a really good question. I think the barriers largely have to do with bureaucracy and stigma.
Mhm.
I think that there's a fear of vulnerability in those
Mhm.
environments. I think in some places, providing compassionate care to all humans, regardless of what they've done, where they come from, is not exactly prioritized.
Yeah.
And I think you know, these programs are the most successful and they have any chance of working the way that they should at all if we have buy in from a
Yeah.
Department of Corrections or the administration at a prison.
Mhm.
And that happens more often than I think one might think.
Mhm.
There is a need that is often recognized, but there are a lot of people who work at prisons who are not necessarily part of big conversations about change and what should be done. They
Okay.
just get told what's changing and what should be done. And there's, I think, an understandable obstacle there
Uh-huh.
that you know if I wasn't a part of making this decision, if my opinion wasn't asked for and honored, I don't see why I should be doing this.
Ah, okay.
But it's, you know, it's really just a lot of bureaucracy. It's not
Mhm.
easy to
Mhm.
pull something like this off in a
Right.
prison. There's so many
Yeah.
layers of permission and approval and
Yes.
perspective that have to sort of be lifted up one bit at a time.
Yeah.
But I will say as often as I get frustrated
Mhm.
about that, the whole system, the bureaucracy, the seeming lack of care towards other humans, this job has actually made me a lot more hopeful than I think I was before.
Okay.
In part because, you know, if you look around the world right now and you read the news and you're kind of in the climate, it feels very oppressive and
Mhm.
heavy. And my job actually gives me a chance to see that even in places where that is the case all of the time, humanity happens
Right.
and people care for each other, whether it's easy to do or not. There can be
Yeah.
every obstacle in the world. People will find ways to care for other people. We do that. And that has really solidified, I think, in my belief system, which is new since working in this space. I used to be a lot more cynical, I
Uh-huh.
think. And then just, doing the work and coming across, sites where maybe they're a little apprehensive, a little pessimistic about if it could work and how well it could work. And then seeing over time
Yeah.
sort of the change in attitudes,
Mhm.
the growing level of acceptance, even more often than not, an ask for expansion into other sites because it's working so well.
Wow.
That gives me hope. I just think it's not a fast
Yeah.
it's not a fast change. It's
Yeah.
something that requires a lot of patience
Mhm. Yeah.
and a little bit of faith
Yeah.
to
Well, so
feel
it's a
like,
marathon, not a sprint.
yeah, exactly. We say that a lot.
Huh? Yeah. Yeah.
And we have to remind ourselves about that a lot
Uh-huh.
because,
Yeah.
all the myriad problems associated with mass incarceration here in the United States are not going to be solved overnight.
Mhm.
And they're not going to be solved by one organization or one
Right.
person or one innovative idea. It's going to require all of it working at the same time
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
move an inch.
Wow. Well, so where are prison hospices taking place aside from California?
hmm
What other states is this happening?
So I'll say technically it's kind of hard to
Oh,
have a number. They're not always included in data or reports. And a lot of these programs are pretty grassroots. For
okay.
example, the group of caregivers I've been working with at one of the women's prisons here, the program actually started 20 years ago
Wow.
when residents at the prison said, "Hey, we need a way of caring for each other as we age and get ill." And they contacted a local hospice who's been working with them ever since. So that exists. We don't know what the number looks like. I
Wow.
can say that for our organization, we currently operate in 5 prisons here in California, and we've recently expanded into Michigan
Mhm.
and Washington. We actually just got back from doing our needs assessment at 4 prisons in Washington. We'll be expanding into Oregon. We're doing needs assessments there in the next couple of months. So we are expanding, and it's actually one of the great joys is coming across people at a conference or in a webinar who, we've never met, but they're doing this work in another state. And it's always this moment for me of like, oh, thank God. Like,
Yeah.
because, sometimes it can feel like we're working in a little bit of a silo, but,
Yes.
but that's not the case.
Mm.
There are prison hospice programs in Iowa. My colleague Edgar Behrens made a documentary maybe 10 or 12 years ago about a hospice program at the Iowa State Penitentiary.
Wow.
Yeah, I think there are prison hospice programs in Colorado and Illinois. So, I
Wow.
always tell people when they reach out and ask if there's something like that happening in their
Mhm.
state or in their region to
Mhm.
do a little bit of research because there
Yeah.
may be and we
Mhm.
may have no idea.
Mhm.
And if it's the case, please let us know. We'd love to talk to them.
Yeah.
But that if it's not happening there right now, to just have heart
Huh.
and trust that I think at some point there will be. Again,
Yeah.
it's a slow moving
Yeah. No,
change.
that's really hopeful, though. It's hopeful to hear this.
Yeah.
Has there been any formal research?
Yes, but very little.
Huh? Okay.
There is not a lot of formal academic research on prison hospice palliative care, but there is increasingly more research over the last, I would say, maybe 6 or 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and we do get outreach from people who are working in universities
Yeah.
or, from the medical community who are in the process of doing that research.
Huh.
We're actually also in the process of refining a lot of our evaluation methodologies. And so we're hoping that we can be a little bit more active in contributing to that. Because certainly that's part of the issue behind
Right.
visibility and not
Yeah.
really knowing how many of these programs exist.
Right, exactly. Well, that's great. Well,
Yeah.
maybe I can include some of those as resources for folks
Yeah.
in the show notes,
Yes,
and I
I'd be
can
happy to provide that.
get those from you. Yeah. Well, what would you say, sort of to bookend our talk, you could offer one reflection or final, comment about this meaningful work? I mean, you've already said so much, but
Yeah, I think it's important, especially now, for people to know that compassion can and does exist everywhere,
yeah. Yeah.
even in hard places, even during hard times, even when you least expect it. It's not necessarily making the news the way
Yeah.
that other things are, but it is happening in real time.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that caring for people is a very ordinary thing that we
Mm.
do, but it's also an extraordinary thing that we do.
Mhm.
I think sometimes it's a revolutionary thing that we do
Mhm.
when
Mhm.
everything is working against us to
Mhm.
prevent us from doing so. And I think that grief and dignity are deeply intertwined, that when we acknowledge one, we are acknowledging and restoring the other,
Mhm. Mhm.
which I think is important to remember in these spaces as well, where, vulnerability is not necessarily something that's really common or freely given, but that grieving somebody, caring for them is in and of itself restoring that person's dignity and that person's honor.
Wow. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, Laura, thank you so much for sharing, your personal experiences and just the overall transformative, holistic perspective of this. I think even this conversation has been transformative for me. Even though I knew about, the prison hospice, just, revisiting this conversation with you and hearing more and also learning that it is growing
Hmm.
and there is growth, even if it takes place, slower, it's happening. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I will include some resources and notes for folks. And if folks have any additional questions, I can certainly pass those questions along to you.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll provide some resources to share and our contact information and our website as well. We've got lots of
Okay,
ways to keep in touch and
great.
stay informed. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
thank you.